A small beggar saves a millionaire from a terrible accident. Then this happens. The early winter chill of New York City clung to the bustling sidewalks near Times Square, where neon lights and towering screens dazzled locals and tourists alike. Amid the frenzy, a tall, silver-haired businessman named Robert Hartford stepped away from his chauffeured car, mind locked on a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. Life for him was a whirlwind of boardrooms, bank accounts, and briefcases, until a wayward sedan spun out of control near the curb. Oblivious, Robert took a step into the street. Suddenly, a small boy in ragged clothes lunged forward, pulling him back just in time. That lone act, by a homeless child, would ignite a series of events that rocked Robert's carefully constructed world. Robert Hartford was no stranger to Manhattan's pulse. He'd navigated deals in gleaming skyscrapers, forged alliances with business luminaries, and attended galas with the likes of Mark Cuban and Bill Gates. His net worth soared beyond most imaginations, yet his heart remained tethered to spreadsheets and stock tickers, seldom pausing for the gritty realities just outside his penthouse doors. That brisk afternoon, he left a midtown meeting, stepping onto 42nd Street to meet his driver. Phone glued to his ear, mind swirling with a pending acquisition, he walked straight off the curb without noticing a screeching sedan losing control. Onlookers gasped, some shouting, but Robert, engrossed in corporate chatter, didn't register the danger. The car careened wildly, tires smoking. A flash of movement cut through the chaos. A small figure, no taller than Robert's waist, lunged forward, grabbing Robert's expensive wool coat and yanking him backward. The sedan squealed past, missing him by inches, sparks dancing off the asphalt. Robert stumbled, heart pounding, phone flying from his hand to smash on the sidewalk. A stunned hush followed as the car roared off, leaving only the echo of screeching tires behind. Blinking, Robert whirled to see his rescuer, a ragged boy with big eyes wearing a threadbare jacket. Are you okay, mister?" the child stammered. Robert's breath hitched, adrenaline still pumping. I'm fine. You saved my life." The boy, maybe 10 or 11, merely shrugged, turning aside as if to fade back into the city's oblivion. But Robert grabbed his shoulder, gentle yet firm. "No, wait. You saved me. At least let me thank you." The boy cast an uneasy glance at Robert's fine clothes, as if suspecting some trick. In that moment, amid sirens and rattled onlookers, Robert felt something shift. This child, battered by life's harsh edges, had risked his own safety for a stranger. Robert Hartford, the stoic millionaire, found his carefully ordered existence jarred. He decided in that instant he couldn't just walk away. The next steps he took would entwine his fate with the boy's in a way that neither could anticipate. Once Robert overcame the initial shock, he guided the boy out of the crowd. On a quieter side street, he crouched to meet the child's gaze. "I'm Robert Hartford," he said, voice still shaky. "What's your name?" The boy fidgeted, eyes wary. "Jonah," he whispered. His face, thin, smudged with city dust, radiated both caution and resilience. Robert guessed he might be homeless from his ragged shoes and patched sweater, his small frame trembling in the chilly wind. With soft urging, Robert asked, "Jonah, are you alone? Do you have parents or a place to stay?" Jonah hesitated, gaze dropping. "No, I've got nowhere. I sleep in shelters sometimes. My mom, she disappeared months ago. Dad, I never knew him." The boy's voice cracked on that last statement, but he quickly steadied himself. "I'll be okay, mister. You don't have to worry." A surge of protectiveness rippled through Robert. He recalled his own childhood in Cleveland, how his mother's illness left him feeling powerless. Over decades, he'd hardened to survive the corporate battlefield, seldom letting emotion sway him. But Jonah's bravery touched a chord. "You saved my life, Jonah," he said gently. "Let me at least buy you something warm to eat, maybe find you a coat. It's too cold out here." Jonah cast a hesitant glance, fearful of being scammed perhaps, but hunger and exhaustion won out. He gave a slow nod. Robert signaled his driver, who arrived with the sedan. The boy's eyes widened at the luxurious car. "Come on," Robert coaxed. "No harm, I promise." With a small gulp, Jonah climbed into the back seat, dwarfed by plush leather. Robert slid in beside him, instructing the driver to head to a nearby diner he knew was safe. As the city lights flickered past the tinted windows, Jonah stared in silent awe. Robert observed the child's vulnerability, heart swelling with paternal feelings he'd never explored. The wealthy executive who once measured life's value in capital gains now found purpose in a child's well-being. And though neither realized it, Jonah's presence was about to unravel secrets and open doors to truths that would reshape both their destinies. They arrived at a cozy diner, Frankie's 24 an hour, where Robert often stopped for late-night coffee after negotiations. The warm lights and aroma of sizzling bacon enveloped Jonah, who'd grown used to stale bread or convenience store scraps. They settled in a back booth, the vinyl seats squeaking under them. Robert ordered a hot chocolate and a hearty plate of spaghetti for the boy, plus a coffee for himself. The waitress eyed Jonah's worn clothes, but, seeing Robert's commanding presence, withheld comment. Jonah hesitated, gazing at the plate piled high with noodles and sauce. "Go ahead," Robert urged. "Eat as much as you want." Tentatively, Jonah twirled the fork. Once he took the first bite, hunger overcame shyness, and he devoured the meal. Robert sipped his coffee, equal parts pained and relieved by the boy's evident starvation. Between bites, Jonah answered Robert's gentle questions. He'd been on the streets for weeks after a short stay at a youth shelter. He had no contact info for his mother, who vanished amid personal troubles. "Sometimes I think she left on purpose, or maybe something bad happened," he whispered, eyes lowered. "I get by with some coins, rummaging for cans. It's not so bad usually." But the sadness in his voice told a different story. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. No child should endure this. As Jonah finished, Robert took a breath. "Jonah, you saved me. Let me help you back. I can't let you wander the streets alone." The boy's immediate reflex was alarm. You want to call the police or something? They might throw me into a foster home again. Those places can be not good." Robert felt torn. Legally, the child welfare system was the official route, but Jonah's fear was understandable. Robert, who had the resources to provide a safer alternative, decided on a direct approach. "Why not stay with me for a while? We'll figure it out. Maybe locate your mother or find you a stable environment. I have a big home, extra rooms. You won't be forced anywhere you don't want to go." Jonah studied him, uncertain. But something in Robert's eyes, gratitude, sincerity, convinced him to trust. Slowly, Jonah nodded. "All right, if you really mean it." Robert nodded, paying the check, pressing a generous tip on the grateful waitress. As they stepped back into the swirling neon of the city, a new chapter opened. Two strangers forging a fragile alliance. Neither suspected the deeper threads at play, nor how an even more shocking discovery lay waiting in Jonah's past. When the sedan pulled up outside Robert's high-rise near Central Park, Jonah's mouth fell open at the imposing glass and steel tower. Valets and doormen greeted Robert by name, eyeing Jonah curiously but not daring to question. Inside, the marble lobby glistened under chandelier light. Jonah, still clutching a worn backpack with all his earthly belongings, felt dwarfed by the opulence. Robert offered a gentle nudge, guiding him to the private elevator that whisked them skyward. The penthouse spanned an entire floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Manhattan skyline, plush furniture, modern art on the walls. Jonah couldn't help but gawk. Robert, noticing, softly said, "You can relax. This is your home now. At least until we figure out next steps." A swirl of emotion flickered in Jonah's eyes. He stammered, "I've never seen anything like this." Robert summoned his personal assistant, Martha Reynolds, explaining the situation. She raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Hartford. I'll arrange clothing, toiletries, and maybe a comfortable bed in the guest room." Jonah's face lit up. He couldn't recall the last time he'd slept in a real bed. Martha guided him down a hallway to a spacious bedroom with warm lighting, crisp linens, even a small desk. Jonah walked as though in a dream. The night Robert faced a restless mind. his day's near-death experience overshadowed by the reality of hosting a homeless child. He poured a whiskey in his study, gazing out at the city lights, uncertain how best to care for Jonah. But deep inside, he felt a paternal stir, a sense of purpose that his money alone had never provided. Across the penthouse, Jonah showered in a bathroom bigger than some shelters he'd stayed in, scrubbing away the grime and worry. Emerging in new pajamas, he curled up on the plush bed, almost trembling from the unfamiliar softness. He tried to keep awake, fearful that the dreamlike comfort might vanish, but exhaustion overtook him, and soon he slipped into the deepest sleep he'd had in years. In the hush of the penthouse halls, two worlds, billionaire luxury and street survival, melded. Their fragile arrangement was no short fling. The seeds of a life-changing bond took root, though neither realized the magnitude of the challenges still to come. Over the next week, Robert crafted a daily routine for Jonah. Breakfast together, then online tutoring arranged by Martha. The boy's eyes sparkled with curiosity whenever encountering something new. How a dishwasher worked, or that he could pick cereals from the kitchen's enormous pantry. Robert discovered Jonah devoured books, from simple children's tales to more advanced narratives. The private tutor reported Jonah was behind academically, but showed a bright mind eager to learn. Yet shadows persisted. Jonah had nightmares calling out for a mother named Elena. Robert tried gently asking, "Is that your mom's name, Elena?" The boy nodded but had few details, just that she once told him they came from Detroit originally, fleeing some difficulties. The name Elena Harmon rang no bell for Robert, but he suspected a deeper story. Meanwhile, the detective assigned to Jonah's case occasionally updated them, saying no leads on a mother named Elena had surfaced. Robert let Jonah remain under his care, finding comfort in the boy's presence. One evening, rummaging for a sweater in Jonah's old backpack, Martha uncovered a small, battered photograph, a young woman with a faint resemblance to Jonah, standing next to a man whose face was half torn off from the edge of the picture. The backside read, "Elena and 8 years ago, Detroit." Robert, seeing it, felt a pang. Perhaps that man was Jonah's father. Did Jonah remember anything? The child shook his head, biting his lip. "Mom never talked about him," he whispered. Robert recognized this situation was more complex than typical guardianship. Jonah might have paternal relatives out there, or none. Robert resolved to protect the boy from further heartbreak. But the next day, an unexpected phone call from Martha revealed more. She discovered a snippet of an old newspaper article from Detroit stuffed in the same backpack. Something about a missing child case? The words were too faded to read fully, but it sparked a new question. Had Jonah been missing from somewhere else entirely? In the hush of the penthouse, Robert felt an undercurrent of tension. Jonah was safe, yes, but a swirl of unanswered questions about Elena's disappearance and the unknown father loomed. Despite that, day by day, the bond between millionaire and child deepened, built on the gratitude from their first near-accident rescue. Robert had no idea that soon, a shocking revelation about Jonah's heritage would explode into view, forcing them to reevaluate everything. As the weeks passed, Jonah blossomed under the stable environment. He gained a few pounds, his face losing the pinched look of malnourishment. With private lessons, he caught up academically, surprising Robert with quick mastery of basic math. They had dinner conversations about small daily joys, Jonah's progress in reading, Robert's discussions about philanthropic projects or stock market shifts. The boy asked wide-eyed questions about how big business worked. Robert found himself explaining in child-friendly terms, enjoying the role of teacher, even father figure. It felt new, thrilling, and daunting all at once. One Saturday, Robert took Jonah to the American Museum of Natural History. The child's excitement soared as they explored dinosaur fossils and space exhibits. Observing Jonah's wonderment, Robert realized how little joy he'd felt in his own success prior to this. Something intangible about guiding this boy through educational wonders filled a void in Robert's heart. On the ride back, Jonah dozed in the car, head leaning against Robert's arm. The typically stoic businessman felt tears prick behind his eyes. At times, the detective assigned to Jonah's missing persons case swung by for updates. He had no progress on finding Elena. Robert, anxious that Jonah might be forced into the system if a father appeared, kept him close. He also confided in Jonah that if the mother never reappeared, he'd be open to adopting Jonah, assuming the courts allowed it. The boy, trying not to get too hopeful, nodded bravely. Another transformation was in Robert's own circle. Some acquaintances questioned why he'd disrupt his life for a street kid. Others admired him. A few business deals slowed as Robert devoted more time to Jonah's welfare, but Robert found he didn't mind. For the first time, wealth served a higher purpose, nurturing a child's life. He vowed to stand by Jonah no matter what challenges lay ahead. Little did they know, the biggest challenge was waiting just around the corner. A single phone call from across state lines would blow open Jonah's real origins, unveiling a father he never knew existed, and linking him to a tragic event that would force Robert to either fight for Jonah's custody or lose the boy forever. Late one afternoon, Robert was in his study reading a children's novel with Jonah. The phone rang. Martha answered, then hurried in with concern. "Sir, a man named Daniel Harmon is on the line. He claims to be Jonah's father." Robert's stomach lurched. He shot Jonah a quick, guarded look. The boy froze, heart pounding. "What do I do, Dad?" The word Dad slipped from Jonah's lips for the first time, startling them both. Robert set the book aside, determined to see who was behind this claim. On the phone, Daniel Harmon introduced himself with a heavy tone. "I heard from an old acquaintance that you have a boy named Jonah, about 10, living with you. That's my son." He explained years ago Jonah's mother took him away after a messy separation. "I've been searching for him. I just found out he was on the streets in New York. I want him back. I have the legal right." Robert's protective instincts flared. "Jonah's never mentioned you. He said you were absent. Where have you been?" Daniel's voice turned defensive. "I was never told about him by name. Ebony, Jonah's mother, disappeared. I tried to find them. Now I have proof. I want to come see him or we go to court." The call ended abruptly, leaving Robert seething with worry. Jonah watched from the doorway, tears brimming. "Is he really my father?" he asked in a tremulous voice. Robert, swallowing, said, "He claims so. Let's see if the detective can confirm. Don't panic." The next day, the detective verified that a Daniel Harmon had once filed a missing child report. Ebony, however, left with Jonah. The father had a checkered record, some prior arrests, small-time scuffles, but nothing too severe. Now, apparently stable, Daniel insisted on paternal rights. The social worker insisted on a paternity test. If Daniel was indeed the father, the courts might force Jonah into his custody unless Robert contested. Tension soared. Jonah, terrified, told Robert tearfully he didn't want to live with a father he never knew, especially if Daniel might be unkind. Robert, reeling from the news, realized he might lose the child he'd grown to love like a son. To keep Jonah safe, Robert might have to wage a fierce custody battle, one that would drag Ebony's absence, Jonah's homelessness, and Robert's own unorthodox guardianship into the harsh glare of legal scrutiny. The once simple vow to protect Jonah had spiraled into a potential war for parental rights. Within days, Daniel Harmon showed up in Manhattan, demanding to see Jonah. He arrived at Robert's penthouse building, wearing a worn leather jacket, an uneasy grimace on his face. Robert, after ensuring the doormen recognized him, reluctantly let Daniel inside, under supervision. In the living room, Jonah stood behind Robert's chair, trembling. Daniel tried an awkward, "Hello, son," but Jonah's eyes showed only fear. The tension was palpable. Daniel recounted how Ebony left him years ago, that he'd tried searching but had limited resources. He insisted he was reformed now, holding a stable trucking job in New Jersey. He had a small apartment ready for Jonah. "I want to do right by my boy," Daniel said, voice unsteady. "He belongs with me, not a stranger." Robert stiffened. "I'm not a stranger. Jonah saved me. I've been caring for him ever since. Where were you all this time?" Daniel, bristling, retorted. I didn't know where they were, but now that I do, I'm stepping up. Jonah shook his head vigorously. I don't want to go with him, he whispered. He's not part of my life. Daniel's face flashed hurt. It's not your choice, kid. I'm your father. At that, Robert intervened. Jonah's well-being is paramount. He's been stable here. If you truly care, you'd approach gently, let him adjust. Forcing him to move again will traumatize him. Daniel glowered, suspecting the wealthy magnate wanted to keep Jonah. The conversation ended in a standoff, Daniel threatening legal action for custody. The next day, attorneys for both sides convened. They argued over paternity. A quick DNA test confirmed Daniel was indeed Jonah's biological father. The social worker explained that typically, absent a clear unfitness, the biological father could claim rights. But Jonah, old enough to express preferences, complicated matters. The matter would likely proceed to family court, with a judge deciding. Meanwhile, Ebony's whereabouts were still unknown. No sign she was found or stable enough to weigh in. Jonah wept at the prospect of being uprooted. Robert, determined not to let the child slip into an uncertain environment, prepared to fight. He offered Daniel a compromise. We can share guardianship. Let him stay here while you build a relationship. But Daniel refused, suspicious of Robert's money overshadowing him. A custody battle loomed, threatening to tear Jonah from the only real home he'd known. The seeds of heartbreak were sown. A month later, the custody hearing took place in a stately Manhattan family court. Tension gripped the corridors. Daniel, with a modest lawyer at his side, insisted Jonah was his rightful son. Robert, flanked by top-notch attorneys, argued that Jonah's best interests lay in staying with him. News outlets sniffed around for a sensational story. Rich exec battles biological father over a street child's future. Inside the courtroom, the presiding judge, Honorable Valerie Brooks, heard arguments from both sides. Daniel's counsel hammered on paternal rights. The father is alive, reformed, and seeking to reclaim his child. Robert's team pointed to Daniel's late entry, questionable stability, and Jonah's vehement wish not to leave Robert. The judge called Jonah to speak in a private session, wanting the child's unfiltered perspective. Over tears, Jonah explained how Daniel was a stranger who never showed up until now, and how safe he felt with Robert. The judge listened gravely, mindful of respecting paternal claims but also the child's welfare. Mid-hearing, a dramatic twist. Ebony, Jonah's missing mother, was discovered in a downtown shelter. She arrived, disheveled and shaky, guided by a volunteer. She'd apparently had a mental health crisis that led her to wander aimlessly. Ebony's entrance stunned everyone. The judge promptly allowed her to testify. Ebony tearfully recounted her struggles, lack of stable income, fear that Daniel's temper was unfit for Jonah, her flight from an abusive foster arrangement. She admitted regret for not contacting Robert or any stable resource. The entire courtroom listened in hushed empathy. With Ebony present, the judge asked, "Whom do you believe can best care for Jonah now?" Ebony cast a watery glance at Daniel, then Robert, then Jonah. In a trembling voice, she said, "Jonah has grown so much under Mr. Hartford's care. I truly think he's found love and security there. Daniel has the right to be in Jonah's life, but not full custody. Not yet. My son needs stability, therapy, healing from all the past chaos." This testimony jarred Daniel, who looked stung. Ebony's stance empowered Robert's argument. The judge recognized the complexities, postponing a final ruling but indicating she might rule in favor of a shared arrangement that respected Jonah's preference to remain primarily with Robert, while Daniel built a relationship over time. The court set another date, leaving the child's future suspended in the balance. Meanwhile, mother and father exchanged tense glances, the seeds of reconciliation faintly present, overshadowed by a father's anger, a mother's guilt, and the millionaire's unconditional devotion to Jonah's well-being. In the aftermath, Ebony took temporary lodging near Robert's penthouse, courtesy of his financial support, while Daniel lingered in a modest hotel. The judge's instructions were clear. All parties should attend family therapy sessions with Jonah, aiming to find a balanced solution. Over sessions led by a soft-spoken counselor named Dr. Vera Holmes, tension slowly thawed. Daniel vented that Ebony robbed him of fatherhood. Ebony admitted fear and paranoia led her to vanish. Robert, though not biologically tied, explained how Jonah's rescue spurred a fatherly bond he refused to break. Jonah observed these sessions with a mix of relief and anxiety, sometimes burying his face in Robert's side, other times glancing at Daniel as if yearning for paternal acceptance. Ebony apologized to Jonah for her disappearance. She apologized to Daniel for cutting him out. She thanked Robert for stepping in. Step by step, they inched toward a fragile truce. Eventually, Miss Holmes recommended a shared custody approach, Jonah primarily residing with Robert, given the stable environment he already had, but Daniel granted scheduled visitation. Ebony, once stable, could rejoin as a caretaker. The judge, seeing Jonah's own clear preference, agreed. The final hearing concluded with the judge praising the child's heroism in saving Robert, and Robert's decision to repay that heroism with fatherly care. She hammered the gavel, finalizing a unique arrangement that recognized the paternal rights Daniel did hold, while honoring Jonah's emotional bond to Robert. Back at the penthouse, Jonah exhaled relief, hugging Ebony, Daniel, and Robert in a group that felt more like a patchwork family than adversaries. Daniel, subdued, told Robert quietly, "I misjudged you. Thank you for stepping up for Jonah. I'll work on being a better father figure." Ebony nodded, tears glistening. Robert, eyes full of gratitude, embraced them. A sense of closure, for the moment, settled, though the road ahead would require ongoing effort, understanding, and trust. Nonetheless, the core was set. Jonah found a permanent home with Robert, plus re-established connections with both biological parents. The boy's once uncertain future brightened, built on the love that blossomed from a single life-saving moment on the street. In the weeks that followed, the newly formed family navigated uncharted territory. Ebony, working on her mental health and job training, visited Jonah daily. Daniel commuted from his small place in New Jersey to see his son on weekends. Robert allowed them to gather at his penthouse, sharing meals and playing board games. Tension still lurked. Daniel sometimes bristled at the wealth on display. Ebony occasionally sank into guilt, but overall, they advanced with a common mission, supporting Jonah's growth. Jonah thrived in the newly supportive environment. Freed from the anxiety of losing a caretaker, he excelled in tutoring, forging friendships with building staff's children. Robert privately arranged martial arts lessons, hoping to imbue Jonah with confidence. He also organized weekend outings, a museum trip with Ebony, a baseball game with Daniel. Seeing how Jonah's face lit up as he introduced Daniel to his new friend from the building, Robert realized the boy was bridging two worlds, a father from the past and a benefactor from the present. Media interest waned after the court's final ruling. A few philanthropic circles quietly admired Robert's paternal dedication. "He's not even the father," some rumored incorrectly, but those close to the family knew the complicated truth. Ebony sometimes expressed her gratitude. "You gave Jonah a stable life I never could. I won't forget it." Robert responded humbly that Jonah gave him new purpose. In fleeting moments, he reflected on how this boy's rescue had saved him from more than a car accident. It saved him from emotional stagnation. At times, Daniel and Ebony joined the pair in philanthropic events, highlighting a new synergy: father, mother, child, plus the philanthropic mogul whose paternal role overshadowed the rest. It was unusual, but it worked. Jonah seemed content, if still occasionally anxious that it could unravel. But Robert reassured him, "We're all here for you always." Indeed, from that unlikely spark on a busy Manhattan street, a mosaic of love and acceptance emerged, each figure forging a place in Jonah's future. 2 years later, on a bright spring morning, the city's energy felt alive with renewal. Jonah, now 12, thrived academically, exuding confidence once absent from his posture. Ebony rented a small apartment near Robert's building, found steady work at a local nonprofit that served homeless families, turning her past struggles into empathy for others. Daniel relocated closer, snagging a stable construction job in the Bronx, determined to be present in his son's life. They all coexisted in a cooperative web of visitation schedules, family dinners, and occasional disputes that smoothed over with sincere communication. Robert, for his part, discovered that fatherhood enriched him more than any corporate victory. He scaled back on relentless expansions, focusing on philanthropic endeavors tied to youth education. The orchard of fatherly love he planted with Jonah blossomed, overshadowing the memory of that near-death accident by the sidewalk. Sometimes Robert marveled at fate's cunning. A car out of control, a small beggar's selfless act, culminating in a paternal bond that overcame legal tangles, fear, and distrust. On that spring day, they all gathered at Jonah's middle school science fair. He'd built a project about urban farming solutions, merging Daniel's practical input and Robert's tech insights. Ebony beamed with pride, snapping pictures. Jonah, receiving a ribbon for most innovative exhibit, grinned from ear to ear, glancing across the cafeteria at the three adults who formed his mishmash family. In that moment, he realized how profoundly his life had changed. He was no longer a boy shivering on the street. He was a boy with three guardians who, despite their differences, loved him. After the fair, they strolled the sunny block. The quadruple presence drew double takes. A well-dressed millionaire, a humble father, a determined mother, and a bright-eyed boy all chatting easily. Jonah paused, turning to Robert. "Dad," he said, using the word for Robert, though Daniel also claimed paternal rights. "Thank you for everything." Robert gently ruffled Jonah's hair, saying, "Thank you for saving me that day. You changed my world more than I changed yours." Ebony and Daniel smiled, acknowledging the strange but beautiful tapestry fate had woven. Indeed, from such a precarious beginning, they found a love that triumphed over adversity, forging a new future shaped by unity rather than chance. In the end, a single instant of crisis united Robert Hartford and Jonah against all odds. The wealthy magnate, once consumed by boardroom triumphs, found his life's purpose in protecting a street-smart child who risked everything to spare him from a fatal collision. As shocking details of Jonah's past and estranged parents emerged, Robert refused to let the boy slip back into anonymity. Instead, he fought through legal tangles and paternal claims to ensure Jonah's safety and happiness. Today, they stand as an unlikely family, joined by an act of heroism that sparked compassion. Jonah, once an invisible face among the homeless, thrives in school and knows the warmth of parental figures. Robert, no longer just a millionaire juggling deals, embraces a father's role with pride. Their story proves that sometimes the greatest investments are those made in a human soul. If this stirring tale of resilience and acceptance spoke to your heart, please like, share widely, and subscribe to our channel. Help us continue shining a spotlight on the transformative power of empathy and the unbreakable bonds that can arise from a single moment of pure courage.